Mr. President, leaders and builders, mothers and fathers, seniors and students, friends. Imagine a city where the streets lead to cures, a place where the factory floors hum with life-saving medicine, not dependency, where the skyline is laboratories and learning, not bureaucracy and delay, where the traffic of the day is the traffic of ideas, moving at the speed of life itself. That city has a name, Neovia, USA. Immortalis abroad. A biotech freedom city born of an American urgency and carried by human hope. Where this began. My journey did not start in a lab. It started with a question. Why don't people clamor to live healthily and happily well into their hundreds? Or, as Jose just spoke of, forever. Decades ago, I learned a hard truth. Most people weren't asking for longer life because most people weren't living the life that they truly wanted. They were stuck as value producers, good, hardworking, but routine. Yes, drifting into stagnation. Only a rare few ever broke free to become value creators, the builders of new value, the authors of the future. Creators live with exhilaration, not stagnation. They live with wealth earned through innovation. They live with happiness that asks for more years, not fewer years. Now that mindset, which I call the immortal mentality, was the spark. So I spent 45 years doing something unusual for a biotech guy. I wrote. I built tools that lift ordinary people into value creators, into wealth, exhilaration, and abiding happiness. Because when people rise, demand for longevity rises with them. And when demand rises, the supply must meet it. The supply must meet the demand. But there, the second hard truth stood in front of me like a wall. Overburdensome regulation made the supply of longevity crawl. It costs from $1 to $2 billion in a decade or two to bring us just one life-saving drug to market. So investors shrank, timelines stretched, patients waited, and too many never made it. Now, we have all felt such deep tragedies in our lives. So I wrote again. This time I wrote the platform, the bylaws, and a constitution for a city, the prime law, a clear non-aggression framework to free peaceful creation. Pair the people's immortal mentality with a governance model that frees progress, and you have the formula to cure the diseases that haunt every family. This is Neovia's and Immortalis's root. Now today, Let's go from crisis to courage. Neovia rises in America and builds on a pivotal step already taken. An executive order signed in May of 2025 by President Trump, cutting red tape that strangles domestic drug manufacturing. That's Executive Order 14293, if you want to look it up. But even with that, well, I realize we have to be honest here. Reform alone won't win the 21st century biotech race. China is moving fast in clinical trials, which they've surpassed us the past 2 years. In agriculture and defense biotech, we all remember the recent agro-terrorism attempt on our farmlands by Chinese nationalists. So if we hesitate, we don't just lose jobs, we risk our health, our food, our security, and our future. So Neovia USA takes the next step and makes it concrete. A city on federal land transformed into state-of-the-art labs, manufacturing plants, and research campuses. That's right, a biotech freedom city that compresses the distance between discovery and delivery. And because disease won't wait for ribbon cuttings, we've done something very unique. Neovia begins day one with a Neovia virtual zone. In other words, companies that contract to build in Neovia receive targeted regulatory relief immediately, accelerated approvals, and fast-tracked reimbursement models now, so therapies can reach Americans before a single brick is laid. Immediate and permanent results now, permanence forever. Now, we've heard President Trump talk, particularly in these last couple of weeks, about the national emergency level of biotech, our biotech race against China. We're answering that emergency. America's next moonshot. This is how great American leaps have always worked. Detroit didn't just build cars, it built a middle class. Silicon Valley didn't just code, it rewrote how the world thinks. Apollo didn't just touch the moon, it touched our national soul. Neovia is that kind of leap. But the American flag we plant on the future won't be the moon. It will be on human health. To make it real, we're introducing an executive order to President Trump that builds upon Order 14293 he signed 4 months ago. In our executive order, we propose a biotech freedom task force in the West Wing, chaired by the National Security Advisor, vice-chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, with Defense, Energy, Commerce, FDA, NIH, and CMS around the same table. In 60 days, together, we could select the land, we could greenlight the first cohort of companies, and launch an annual program to fund 30 breakthrough innovations. And in 90 days, we could deliver the full phase one, the site plan, the roster, and the framework to the President. Neovia operationalizes what I call warp biotech, validating biomarkers and surrogate endpoints, standardizing high-fidelity digital trials, and designating supervised experimental use zones where regenerative, genetic, and AI-driven technologies can be reasonably tested and scaled. Pair that freedom with incentives, research prioritization, targeted tax relief for our on-site build-out, and CMS payment models ready for the moment a therapy clears. Foreign companies are welcome if they build here inside Neovia. American independence in critical medicines is not a slogan, it is a policy. In a divided era, Neovia opens a rare bipartisan lane because it speaks to the largest and most reliable voting bloc in America, seniors, and to everyone who loves them. 9 in 10 Americans are either suffering from a chronic disease or suffering as they watch a loved one struggle. When a project promises faster cures for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, heart disease, well, it becomes more than a policy. It becomes moral common sense. Politically, neither party can afford to turn its back on that reality. Moreover, no nation can sustain ballooning healthcare costs with shrinking birth rates and an aging population, which is a worldwide problem today. Neovia addresses both. Curing age-related disease reduces the fiscal load. Affordable world-class care lifts every household. As older Americans regain health and strength, well, particularly with my writings, many will re-enter the workforce, transform from takers of care to makers of values. Now that's not a burden, my friends. That's a boom. That's an economic boom. Well, now let's talk about the constitution of a city that cures. Neovia's backbone is the prime law. It codifies a simple truth. No person or institution may initiate force or fraud. With that clarity, value creators flourish, science advances, patients heal, investors fund. The rule is not anything goes. The rule is no aggression, robust responsibility. That is the difference between chaos and catalytic freedom. And freedom at this level is not merely philosophical. It's physiological. When a city ends physical suffering and ends the emotional suffering of families, well, people feel freedom in their bones. That stimulus response becomes addictive in the best way. The more relief people experience, the more they demand freedom that produced it. That is how a beachhead, Neovia, curing age-related diseases, how a beachhead becomes a nation's new norm. Just you wait and watch. Now, sister cities and a single pipeline. This vision is American. And at the same time, it's bigger than America. Argentina, under President Javier Milei, offers a historic opening for research freedom. I know you're all familiar with his economic outlook and philosophy. Neovia USA and Neovia Argentina, as sister cities, create a 2-engine pipeline. Accelerated R&D in Buenos Aires, and a rapid pathway to the U.S. market through Neovia USA, and to our manufacturing base. Investors understand this instantly. Scientists have told me plainly that with that kind of freedom, the breakthroughs that seemed someday suddenly can arrive in our lifetimes. So there is a deeper synergy here. Neovia, Argentina can demonstrate at the survival level what liberty delivers. The end of fear in clinics and the end of despair at the kitchen table. When 90% of the people feel freedom as healing, the non-aggression ideal ceases to be theory. It becomes daily life. From that beachhead, prime law freedom can spread, industry by industry, until a nation catches the same healthy addiction to liberty that cured its families. Folks, I'm talking about a future prime law nation. What rises when we build? Neovia will beat China to the future of biotech, not by copying, but by out-creating. Neovia will secure our supply chains for critical medicines on American soil. Neovia will compress timelines from decades to years to months. Neovia will cut costs while raising quality of healthcare by removing wasteful delay and aligning incentives with outcome. Neovia will create millions of jobs. Yes, I said it. Millions of jobs. From scientists and technicians to builders, operators, and teachers. Once you have a Neovia city, the entire country will be its supplier, will be educated to bring to the world what Neovia offers. Millions of jobs. Millions. Neovia will lift seniors and families from terror. It will raise them into hope, from decline into dignity. And Neovia will prove to America and to the world that principled freedom is the shortest path from lab bench to bedside. My ask, Mr. President, sign my executive order. Establish the Biotech Freedom City Task Force. Activate the Neovia Virtual Zone. Designate the land. Invite the first cohort of companies to build the future here, right here in America. Governors and mayors, compete to host our suppliers and training academies, because this is coming. CEOs and scientists, bring your boldest programs. We will give you the runway. Investors, the uncertainty is over. Timelines will be measured in quarters, not decades. Families, hold on. Hold on. Help is not in theory any longer. It's in motion. It's on its way. My promise. I spent a half century preparing people to want longer, fuller lives and preparing a framework to make those lives possible. I put down the pen to raise the city where it will all come true. Neovia Immortalis is not fantasy. It's not on the pages of my books any longer. It is the missing piece that unites demand and supply, immortal mentality, and prime law freedom. So cures can finally outrun disease. It's our moonshot, our Detroit, our Silicon Valley, gathered into one living city. Let us be the generation that looked at cancer, at Alzheimer's, at failing hearts, and said, no more, no more. Let us be the people who choose courage over caution, creation over drift, and life over delay. Let us build the city that cures our parents and secures our children's futures. Neovia Immortalis, the city that cures. Born of American roots, carried by human vision, shared with the world. Thank you.